The movie begins with a newly married couple, Julia and Francis, moving to Romania. Francis is half Romanian since his mother was from Romania. However, he was brought up in the US and had his job there. But after getting an opportunity for a promotion, he returned to his motherland with his wife, Julia. They reach the airport at night and they call for a cab. The cab driver compliments her in Romanian by looking at her through the mirror on the way to their apartment. Francis translates this to Julia since she doesn't know Romanian. After arriving outside of her rented apartment, Julie looks around and she notices someone watching over them through the window of the opposite apartment. The landlady escorts them to their room and they spend quality time together and eventually fall asleep. Julia wakes up in the night and discovers it's raining outside. She's still lying in bed trying to sleep again, but she gets restless and gets up. As she approaches the window, she begins to gaze outside. She notices someone looking out from their window of the opposite building, but she ignores it. Suddenly, Francis gets up and calls her to him. She tells him to wake her up before he leaves the following day. The following morning, Francis leaves right on time for his work, leaving a message saying that he couldn't wake her up as she was sleeping like a baby and was looking so peaceful. He further added that he would be returning by evening. Julia gets occupied unpacking her stuff and at the same time tries to learn Romanian with Alexa's assistant. She hears strange noises from her adjoining apartment, where a woman yells at someone. In the early evening, she takes a relaxed walk in the city and has an espresso in a nearby cafe. Returning from the bistro, she again watches the window in the opposite building and ignores it. For many days to come, she will keep up with this daily practice and continue learning Romanian. She also tries to understand Romanian culture and history, so she visits a museum and clicks a few pictures. However, a security guard forbids her to do it in Romanian. Although she doesn't understand the language, she apologizes and leaves the museum. She feels separated as this place and language are entirely new to her, and she can't interact with others. Fundamentally, she is mentally exhausted slowly and steadily. One night while she watches through her window, she sees that person again in his home looking at her. She is surprised to see it, but gets interrupted by Francis, who suddenly appears and takes her for dinner with him. While returning, they come across an ambulance, some cops, and a bunch of people standing around a house. The rescue vehicle is also there with a person sitting in it. Both are curious about the incident and reach out to strangers asking about the situation. One of them replies that a woman had died in an apartment. He asks a few more questions, but the stranger seems to have no clue, except that it appears something genuinely awful has occurred. The following morning, Julia notices that the last night's incident has become news, and it's being broadcast on TV news channels. They mention that the police have tracked down a lady's body in that house. The person sitting in the ambulance last night was the one who found the body and called the police. However, the investigation is still in progress. The news disturbs Julia a bit, as the house is close to hers. She tells Francis about the person watching her from the parallel building all the time. Francis asks her to rest assured since she has a powerful man to protect her. They both smile and Francis shrugs it off, saying it was nothing. Francis informs Julia that he's called his colleagues and his better half for an evening feast and requests to cook something tasty for them. While having dinner, all of them talk in Romanian. Since Julia cannot understand much, she feels disconnected. However, her interest gets caught up when Francis' colleagues start discussing the homicide which happened yesterday. His wife tells Julia that the woman who was murdered had her head cut off. Francis says that the police have not revealed it to the general public. However, there's talk that the executioner beheaded his casualty's head this time. Julia asks what he means by this time. According to Francis's colleagues, there's a homicide that happened in a nearby society last month in which a woman's throat was cut open, similar to the previous case. The police accept that a chronic executioner is roaming freely on the street. They call him the Spider. This entire news devastates her. It's revealed that Julia has recently left smoking. A few moments later, Julia gets up and walks out of her apartment to throw the garbage out. There, she sees her neighbor Irene bidding goodbye to her ex on the stairs. Irina apologizes to Julia for making too many noises and requests that the doorbell ring whenever she feels disturbed by too many noises. Julia nods with a smile, and both of them leave. During a midday walk, Julia catches sight of the same news in the newspaper where the face of the casualty is revealed. Eventually, she researches her name and finds almost everything out about the victim. She also finds a statement from a survivor who says that the attacker jumped into her apartment and ran after her from behind. He nailed her down and put his blade on her throat. However, she could not see his face. Although he sat close to her for an hour and left, she could not see his face. Finding out about this, it shattered her, and she started having horrific dreams about this. She feels terrified as she lives alone, and all this homicide news shocks her. Further, she gets disturbed because she thinks someone is constantly following her, but she can't find anyone. To avoid this feeling, she heads to a movie theater, incredibly shocked to find it being a horror flick. While watching it, she feels somebody is sitting just behind her deliberately. Even though the theater is almost empty, this person decides to sit right behind her. She turns and sees the person's face and figures that it might be the similar person watching her from his window. Consequently, she runs away from that point. Afterwards, she enters a store where she attempts to purchase a cigarette, but all at once she sees that person again and gets frightened. She begins running again to avoid him. In a rush, she drops her vegetables and goes to hide behind a door. While watching that person, slowly she realizes he's overly fixated on her. A representative of the grocery store notices Julia inside the storeroom. He thinks she's a thief and says something in Romanian that Julia doesn't understand. She asks him for the back door from where she leaves. This begins influencing Julia's well-being and rest cycle. She tells everything to Francis, who tries to convince her that everything is okay, thinking she might be hallucinating. He initiates romancing her to distract her mind, but she suddenly pushes him away as she is disturbed. He says that he understands, but it seems that he doesn't. However, the two of them return to the same store, where they ask the individual to show them the CCTV footage from yesterday. The recording reveals that Julia was running from the fellow while continually gazing at him. For Francis, it appears evident as the two of them were staring at each other. Julia snaps a picture of that person on her phone. The following morning, Julia begins observing that person's house, eating all day and doing virtually nothing but sitting on a couch and staring at the opposite building in hopes of being able to pick up something from the ajar window curtain. Julia's nervousness and feelings of anxiety increase as her depression doubles. Late at night, she hears somebody knocking on the primary entryway. As she restlessly opens it, she finds an older woman shouting in Romanian continuously. Irina passes by while entering her room, and she interprets the woman for her. The older woman says her pet is missing and is trying to find him. Irina jokes by saying that the cat is not happy with her master. The two women start talking and Julia tells her that her husband is not home. Afterwards, Irina invites Julia for drinks, which she readily accepts, and the two start chilling with a glass of wine and sharing their life stories. Julia tells her that since Francis got a promotion, they decided to move to his hometown. Irina also tells her about her love life, how she fell in love with some guy and how it ended. Suddenly, Irina's ex knocks on the door loudly, yelling in Romanian, to which Irina also yells and shoos him off. Afterwards, she mentions the person isn't terrible, and he gets somewhat animated in some cases. Further, she shows a gun gifted by him and says he gave it to me as security, and she uses it to scare him off. Julia then returns home, opening her curtains, and discovers the man standing in his home watching her. Julia waves to him, and he waves back. This terrifies her, and she shuts the shades. When Francis shows up, he sees her smoking a cigarette she left long ago, clearing up everything for him. Julia says that she wants to call the cops this time, so he calls the police, and Julia shows that person's photograph to the police. The policemen tell her that she can come with them to verify and confront the guy if she wants. However, she refuses to go, saying she thinks it's not a good idea. The officer and Francis go to that person to face him. She waits in her apartment for them to come and give her some good, relaxing news. However, after returning, the police say that the person has not committed any wrongdoing, hence they cannot take action and leave. Francis attempts to comfort Julia as he naturally suspects that she's overreacting. They both start arguing, and Julia claims everything she said is true and believes Francis should trust her. The following day, Francis leaves for work without meeting Julia as she is in the bathroom. Later, Julia on her walk notices the person close to the cafe and chooses to follow him. She follows him all over and reaches a weird place. She enters and, finding a man, asks him about the place. He says that it is a club. She hesitantly enters and finds the place to be a stripper club, and the person she's following works as a cleaner. She tries to hide when he looks at him, only to be found by Irina. Irina works there as a stripper. Julia tells her the whole story. She listens to Julia and says she doesn't know the guy since she's never seen him, as the cleaning staff change daily. Eventually, Irina gets busy with her job. At night, Julia dreams of that man following her to her apartment and trying to kill her. She awakens with sickening dread when she hears a loud, shouting voice from Irina's house. She gets terrified that something terrible might have happened to her. She goes out to check, however, the door is locked. She begins to knock on the door repeatedly. The landlady interrupts her hearing the noise. She insists on opening the door, which she does, since she has an extra key. Entering the room, she finds the cat from the old lady. The older woman takes her cat and leaves. Afterwards, the landlady complains to Francis about Julia's behavior. Indeed, Irina's home remains closed the next day. Julia tries to reach Irina, but she can't find her. After she arrives home, Francis feels sorry that he wasn't able to pay her much attention since he had so much work to do. After some time, she sees a person banging at Irina's door. He presents himself as Irina's ex-boyfriend. Julia tells him that she isn't home. She takes her number from him and tries calling her. The telephone rings inside the house. Abruptly, Julia requests help from the person, asking him to go with her to the opposite building. She needs to see that man's face, and that person agrees, so the two head to the opposite building. On the way, she explains everything to him. He goes directly to that person's door, bangs the door vigorously, and rudely yells in his native language. Suddenly, he receives a call and he has to leave. However, Julia stays there, wanting to see that man. Thus, she walks to the door again and bangs it once more. This time, an older person opens the door. He's frightened. Julia is additionally stunned. This is not the man she was looking for, so she leaves. On her way back, she sees the same man down the stairs. Julia concludes that he lives there. Scared, she takes the lift and leaves. At some point, the previous policeman shows up at Julia's door with the same man who was following her and has complained against her, claiming Julia harassed him and his father. His name was Mr. Weber. The cop persuades him about the misunderstanding and requests that he drops the charges. He makes the two of them shake hands. Francis is relaxed, thinking this would end Julia's stress. He also shows her the news report that the police had captured the serial killer. The executioner is the same person who sat in the rescue vehicle earlier during the incident. Afterwards, the two hit up Francis's office party, where Julia seems to be off and disconnected from the crowd. However, Francis calls her and tries to include her in the discussion, although they're talking in Romanian. Francis casually quips, saying Julia was not tired at home because she had the spider keeping her entertained. Julia understands this is a joke, but still gets disturbed. Eventually, they argue, and Francis tells her he can't do it anymore, and he's just fed up with her fantasy world. So she leaves and goes to a metro station and waits for a while for a train, and then takes a vacant train. After some time, she hears a declaration as the train halts abruptly. Suddenly, Weber shows up there and reclines across from Julia. As usual, she is frightened. He appears to be not okay, as he demands an apology from Julia for harassing him and his dad. He says he has this unfortunate behavior pattern of watching people, but no one has ever noticed him. Julia is the only one who saw and waved at him. Meanwhile, Julia constantly looks at Weber's packet, imagining it may have someone's head chopped off inside it. Julia quickly says sorry and leaves the very next station. She goes directly to her home and begins packing her stuff. When she gets done, she decides to meet Irina before leaving. Subsequently, she turns to her house and finds the door open. She moves in and begins calling her name. To her shock, she tracks down Irina's dead body in her room. She attempts to run. Somebody comes after her from behind. It is Mr. Weber holding her down with a blade. He is the actual chronic killer spider. Suddenly, both hear noises from Julia's home, where Francis is back. He sees Julia's packed bags and feels sorry for making the joke of her. Julia immediately tries to shout and call Francis. However, Weber cuts her throat and she starts bleeding. She begins moving out of the room to save herself from the serial killer and get to Irina's gun, as she knows where Irina used to keep her gun. She attempts to grab it but drops it as she loses her breath. The psychopath serial killer lies by her side and watches her as she dies. Francis calls Irina to find out if Julia is with her. Irina's phone is in her room, and he hears it ring. Meanwhile, a young lady from the other building sees Weber killing Julia. As he comes out after killing Julia, Francis sees him and is shocked, and before he can understand anything, several shots hit Weber as Julia shoots him. She is alive, but she acted as if she was dying. Ultimately, her dread and doubt are justified. Francis sees this, standing there shocked and confused. If you enjoyed that recap, I got a good feeling that you'll like this one too. Click on the video on your screen for more.